If you think every 911 call leads to rescue, you've never heard what happened to Theresa Parker. Subscribe, and let's begin. The shock. August 3, 2008. The storm came out of nowhere. It wasn't the kind that rumbled from a distance, it cracked open the sky like an argument already lost. The rain swept across the cornfields of rural Wisconsin, tapping hard against the siding of an old farmhouse just outside the town of Del Mar. Inside, Theresa Parker, 34, sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling over a half-finished cup of tea. The house was dark except for the dim light above the sink, the one she always left on when her husband worked late. But tonight, her husband, Dale, was away on a delivery run, 3 counties over. Theresa was alone. The clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. That was when she heard it, a soft crunch of gravel from the driveway. At first, she thought it might be a stray animal, but then came the squeak of the front gate, slow, deliberate, human. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for her phone. The screen flickered. The signal was weak, as it often was this far from town, but she dialed 911 anyway. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice barely escaped her lips. Someone's outside. I think someone's watching the house. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly. Ma'am, stay calm. Can you see anyone? Theresa stood up, peering through the thin lace curtain. The porch light swung faintly in the wind, but she couldn't see past the shadows. I don't know. Please, just send someone. I'm at. A loud bang cut through the line. Glass shattered in another room. Ma'am? Ma'am, are you there? The dispatcher could hear her breathing fast, then a crash, the phone clattering to the floor. The last thing recorded on the call was a faint, muffled scream. Then silence. When Deputy Mark Hanlon arrived 20 minutes later, the storm had already buried the road in mud. The farmhouse stood dark and still. Both doors were locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. He circled the property with his flashlight, the beam slicing through the sheets of rain. The back window was cracked but not shattered. The curtains inside moved slightly, though there was no wind getting in. Theresa, he called. No answer. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wet earth and tea gone cold. There were 2 mugs on the counter, one empty, one untouched. The phone lay on the floor beside the kitchen table. The call history showed one outgoing number, 911. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. When the rest of the team arrived, they treated it as a missing person case. The locked doors suggested she'd left voluntarily, or had help leaving. With no blood, no signs of struggle, and a recent history of anxiety medication in her file, the local sheriff chalked it up as possible runaway behavior. But her sister, Maggie Parker, refused to believe it. Theresa doesn't just vanish, she told reporters the next morning. Something happened. She called for help. And they ignored her. 3 days later, a teenage boy named Ethan Caldwell found something near the woods behind the Parker property, a single flip-flop, half buried in the mud. Theresa's size. Her brand. Deputy Hanlon filed it as inconclusive. The storm, he said, could have washed it from anywhere. But what haunted him most wasn't the shoe. It was what he found in the call log. There was only one recorded 911 call from Theresa that night, timestamped at 11:43 p.m. Yet, when Hanlon cross-checked the tower data, he noticed something strange, 2 pings from her phone, 19 minutes apart. Someone, or something, had made another call. But it never reached dispatch. A week later, Dale Parker returned home, exhausted, red-eyed, and furious. "You're telling me my wife called for help and nobody came?" he yelled in the sheriff's office. The sheriff offered him coffee and condolences but no answers. The official line, "No evidence of foul play." Behind closed doors, Dale started his own search. He printed flyers, hired a private investigator, even borrowed a metal detector to comb the woods himself. The neighbors whispered that grief was making him reckless. Some said he'd started sleeping in his truck, watching the fields at night. One evening, Maggie joined him. They sat in silence until Dale broke it. "You ever wonder if she knew the person? Whoever came that night?" Maggie looked toward the dark line of trees. "I think whoever it was, she trusted them. Until she didn't." 2 months passed. The case cooled. Reporters moved on. But one thing refused to fade: the 911 audio. In October, a journalist named Laura Kemp filed a public records request for the original recording. She'd been covering system failures in rural emergency dispatch networks. What she received was a digital file, nearly corrupted, labeled Teresa_Parker_080308.wave. She played it late one night in her apartment. The line crackled with static and rain. Teresa's whisper came through, barely audible. "Someone's outside." Then, silence, then a loud thump, followed by something Laura hadn't heard reported before. A male voice, low and calm, saying, "Put the phone down." The next morning, Laura called Deputy Hanlon. "Your report said the call ended abruptly," she told him. "That's right." "Then why does the tape keep recording for another 24 seconds? Hanlon didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was uneasy. "There shouldn't be anything after that scream," he said quietly. "That file's supposed to be 37 seconds long." Laura exhaled. "Then what I have, is 49. That night, Hanlon drove back to the Parker farmhouse. It had been months since the case was active, but something about that extra 12 seconds clawed at him. The dispatcher's office had been understaffed that night, and system errors weren't uncommon, but a missing 12 seconds could mean one thing: the original file had been edited. He parked outside the old gate, the same one Theresa had heard squeak before she disappeared. The wind was quiet now, no storm this time. Only the crickets, and the distant hum of power lines. Then he noticed something. The porch light was on. And it had been unscrewed from the fixture weeks ago. Hanlon stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. The bulb flickered once, twice, then stayed lit. From inside the house came a faint sound, like static on a radio. He opened the front door, flashlight drawn. The kitchen looked the same. Only one thing had changed. On the table sat an old flip phone, screen glowing. The call timer read, 3 seconds, dialing 911. And then it stopped. The spiral. The phone's screen went black. Deputy Mark Hanlon froze in the kitchen doorway, heart hammering beneath his rain-soaked jacket. The house was supposed to be sealed. The power had been cut weeks ago. Yet the faint hum of electricity buzzed through the walls, like the house itself was waking up. He took a cautious step forward, shining his flashlight on the table. The old flip phone lay motionless now, still warm to the touch. It wasn't Teresa's. Her model had been logged and bagged the night she disappeared. This one, scratched, outdated, and missing a back cover, looked like it hadn't worked in years. But someone had placed it there deliberately. He knelt and opened the phone's call history. Every log was erased except one. One outgoing call, 911, August 3, 2008, 11:43 p.m. The exact minute Theresa vanished. A sharp creak sounded from upstairs. Hanlon whipped his flashlight toward the stairwell, every muscle tightening. "Sheriff's Department," he called. "If someone's here, come out now." Only silence answered him. Then, another sound. Not footsteps. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails brushing against wood. Hanlon stepped slowly toward the stairs, each tread groaning beneath his weight. The tapping grew louder. He reached the landing, sweeping his light across the hallway. 3 doors. One half open. One shut tight. The last, Theresa's old art room, stood ajar, curtains fluttering in a draft that shouldn't exist. He pushed the door open. Inside, the room was untouched. Canvases leaned against the wall, covered in dust. But one painting, propped in the center, was different. Fresh. Wet paint glistened under the beam of his light. It was a portrait. Theresa, standing in her kitchen. And in the reflection of the window behind her, a figure, tall, indistinct, face hidden, watching from the yard. The next morning, Hanlon returned with the sheriff and 2 deputies. But when they entered the house, the painting was gone. Only an empty easel remained. "Are you sure you didn't move it yourself?" Sheriff Dugan asked, his tone skeptical. Hanlon didn't respond. The sheriff sighed. "Mark, you've been on this case too long. You're seeing ghosts." But Hanlon knew what he saw, and he wasn't the only one. That afternoon, journalist Laura Kemp called again. Her voice was tight, urgent. "There's more you need to hear. That file, it's not just longer. The metadata shows 2 edits, one the day after the call, and another 5 years later. Someone accessed it again in 2013. Hanlon frowned. Who would even have permission? Only dispatch supervisors or evidence control. But here's the thing, one of those names is yours. Hanlon's pulse spiked. That's impossible. I never, he stopped himself. Send me the file. Laura hesitated. I already did. But, the email bounced back. Your inbox rejected it before it even arrived. That night, Hanlon drove to the precinct. The power was flickering there too, the old building groaning under the storm rolling in. He logged into the evidence server. His username showed one failed access attempt at 3:17 a.m., while he'd been asleep. Someone was using his credentials to cover their tracks. He printed the access logs, but the printer spat out a blank sheet. A second try produced lines of corrupted text, ending with one legible phrase. She never left. Hanlon stared at the page, feeling the chill climb his spine. The message wasn't typed, it was handwritten. Meanwhile, Laura Kemp was driving through Del Mar, the recording playing softly through her car's stereo. She'd listened to it 20 times already, dissecting every background sound. But this time, she heard something new. Just before the male voice said, "Put the phone down," there was a faint tone, 3 beeps, like a radio transmission cutting in. She replayed it again and again. Those tones weren't part of a normal 911 system. She called Hanlon immediately. Those beeps, they're sheriff radio codes. Someone was on your channel the night of the call. You mean an officer? He asked. Or someone with access to a radio unit. Who? The line went silent for a moment before she said it. Your dispatcher that night, Carla Jensen. She left town a week later, right? Hanlon didn't answer. He knew Carla too well. They'd dated briefly before she transferred. She'd taken another job in Minnesota, disappeared from contact 2 months after the case closed. Laura's voice cut through his thoughts. I think she recorded the second call, and deleted it. Hanlon found Carla's old address the next morning. The house was abandoned, windows boarded. But the mailbox still bore her name. Inside were a few letters, bills, junk mail, and one envelope marked "Return to Sender." No address, no stamp. Inside, a single photograph. It was Theresa Parker, standing in the same kitchen from the painting, only this time, her back was turned. And in the corner of the photo's reflection, that same tall figure again. But across the back of the photo, written in pen, were 4 words. He was one of you. The phrase haunted him all night. He drove to the old dispatch center, now half unused, and dug through archived recordings. Most files were damaged beyond repair, but one stood out, an unmarked tape labeled Training Log July 30, 08. The audio started with static, then Carla's voice, calm and professional. "This is a routine line test. 911, what's your emergency?" Then another voice replied. "Theresa's." Hanlon felt his chest tighten. The date was 4 days before her disappearance. But this wasn't a real emergency call, it was a drill. And the man she was practicing with, the voice that played the intruder, sounded familiar. Hanlon replayed the tape. Slowed it down. The voice was his own. He leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. How could that be? The call log confirmed he'd been on duty that day. Carla must have recorded him during a roleplay exercise. But why was Theresa Parker participating? Unless it wasn't a drill. He listened again. Theresa's tone wasn't acting, it was trembling. Genuine fear. And his own voice, from the recording, low and calm, said the same chilling words the intruder spoke on the night she vanished. "Put the phone down." Hanlon's hands shook. He tried to eject the tape, but it jammed. The machine sparked. Then, darkness. The entire room lost power. In the pitch black, he heard a faint click, a phone opening. A soft, electronic hum filled the air. Then, from somewhere in the room, Theresa's voice whispered, "He's still here." When the lights came back on, the tape deck was empty. The chair across from him was turned slightly, as if someone had just been sitting there. On the desk, where the tape had been, sat the same flip phone he'd found in Theresa's house. The screen glowed again. New voicemail, one message. He pressed play. The voice was unmistakable. "Mark," Carla said softly, "you told me we were helping her. You said it was just to keep her quiet. But you didn't tell me she'd die for it." Static swallowed the rest. Hanlon stumbled back, mind racing. Every memory of that summer blurred, late nights on patrol, strange assignments, quiet favors for the sheriff that didn't make sense. Maybe he'd been part of something and never realized it. He grabbed the phone, dialing Laura in panic. It rang once. Twice. Then a male voice answered. "Deputy Hanlon?" He froze. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, calm, familiar, almost friendly. "You shouldn't have gone back to the farmhouse." Hanlon's flashlight flickered out again. And from the dead phone line, came 3 soft beeps. The reckoning. The 3 beeps echoed through the silence like a countdown. Deputy Mark Hanlon's hand trembled as he gripped the useless phone. Static pulsed in his ear, rhythmic and alive, like the line itself was breathing. Then, nothing. Only the hum of the fluorescent light overhead and the faint drip of rain through a crack in the ceiling. He knew that voice. He just couldn't admit from where. Outside, thunder rolled across Del Mar County. The storm had returned, the same kind of storm that swallowed Theresa Parker the night she vanished. Hanlon slid the flip phone into his pocket, stepped outside the dispatch center, and drove into the darkness. He wasn't heading home. He was heading back to where it all began. The Parker farmhouse looked smaller than he remembered, a dark silhouette against the strobing lightning. The porch light was still on, flickering faintly like a dying heartbeat. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof of his cruiser. The phone in his pocket buzzed once. One new message, unknown number. He opened it. A photo filled the tiny screen, grainy, black and white. It showed himself, standing in the farmhouse doorway, flashlight raised. But he hadn't taken that picture. And no one else had been there. Beneath the image were 3 words. Check the floor. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The smell of mildew and something metallic clung to the walls. He swept his light across the kitchen, the same chair knocked over, the same cracked tile near the pantry. But now, faint footprints marked the dust on the floor, leading toward the back room. He followed them. 1 creaked. 2. On the 3rd, his boot struck something hollow beneath the wood. He crouched down and pressed his hand against the floorboards. The panel lifted slightly under pressure. Hidden seams. A false section. He drew his knife and pried it up. Inside, a metal box, old, rusted, locked with a broken latch. He pulled it free and wiped off the dirt. Inside were 3 things. A tape recorder. A sheriff's badge. And a small, folded note, the paper brittle and yellowed. He unfolded it slowly. If you're reading this, it means they buried the truth deeper than I could dig. I was there that night. She called twice. He answered the second time. No signature. No name. Just one initial, D. Hanlon stared at the badge. It wasn't his. It was engraved with a number, 0472, the old ID of Sheriff Alan Dugan himself. His mentor. The man who'd written the official report. The man who told him to stop digging. He inserted the tape into the recorder and pressed play. Static. Then a familiar voice, Theresa's, panicked, whispering. He's back. Please, someone, please. Then another voice cut in, calm, paternal, unmistakable. Theresa. It's Alan. Listen to me. We just need to talk. Her breathing hitched. How did you get this number? You shouldn't have called again. You already said enough. The sound of a chair scraping. Then, muffled movement. Alan, please, I didn't mean to. A click. A single gunshot. Silence. Then the sheriff's voice, lower now, almost a sigh. She wouldn't stop. God forgive me. Hanlon dropped the recorder. His hands shook violently. He backed away from the table, bile rising in his throat. He'd idolized Dugan. Trusted him. Followed every order. All while Dugan covered up the very crime that destroyed Theresa's life. The front door creaked open behind him. Lightning flashed, revealing a man standing in the doorway, coat soaked, badge glinting under the light. Sheriff Dugan. He looked older, thinner, eyes hollow. I figured you'd find that sooner or later, he said quietly. Hanlon raised his flashlight like a weapon. You killed her. Dugan sighed. She wasn't supposed to die. It was an accident. You silenced her. Dugan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. She was going to ruin everything. You think the county could survive a scandal like that? Dispatch errors, missing tapes, falsified logs? She had recordings, Mark. Of all of us. Including you. Hanlon froze. Me? You answered her first call. You left her waiting when the line dropped. You didn't log the callback. You made the mistake that gave her time to die. Dugan's eyes softened. I covered for you. The words hit harder than a bullet. Hanlon's mouth went dry. You're lying. Am I? Dugan took another step forward. You ever wonder why you don't remember parts of that night? You were there, Mark. You came to the house before me. She was alive when you arrived. Hanlon shook his head, but flashes came, blue lights in rain, a trembling woman at the door, his own voice saying put the phone down. He staggered back. No, that's not. Dugan reached into his coat pocket. You think you can fix this? You think anyone will believe you? They'll burn you first. Thunder shook the windows. Then, a sharp metallic sound. Not a gun. A recorder. Dugan looked down. The one on the table was still running. Its tiny red light blinked. recording everything. Hanlon straightened, meeting his eyes. They don't need to believe me. They'll believe you. For a long, silent moment, Dugan didn't move. Then he smiled, weary, almost proud. You were always the smart one. He turned toward the door, the storm howling outside. I'll save them the paperwork. He walked out into the rain. Hanlon followed a few seconds later, but by then, the sheriff's car was gone. Only tire tracks carved through the mud, leading toward the woods. 3 days later, the county woke to the news. Sheriff Alan Dugan found dead, apparent suicide. His cruiser submerged in a flooded creek. The official report listed overwhelming guilt as motive. The recorder Hanlon had turned in was never found. The Parker case was quietly closed. Again. But for Hanlon, the static never stopped. Late at night, when the storms rolled through, his phone would buzz, an old, broken number lighting the screen. Unknown caller. And each time, he'd answer. And each time, he'd hear her voice, faint, distant, whispering. Mark, they're not gone. Months later, journalist Laura Kemp released her article, The Night the System Went Silent. It went viral across the Midwest. Viewers flooded the comments section, arguing whether the tapes were real or fabricated. The county called it conspiracy. The sheriff's office refused to comment. But buried in the online forums, one user claimed to have found a backup copy of the missing 911 audio. They uploaded it anonymously. The clip ends just like before, the scream, the silence. But this time, a new voice whispers at the very end. A man's voice. I told you, it says, no one would believe her. Weeks passed. Hanlon resigned from the force. He moved 2 towns over, took a job in private security. But every night, the static still came, faint, crackling through his radio no matter how many times he changed the frequency. And one night, as he sat alone in his car, the radio spoke again. Only this time, it wasn't static. It was the same 3 beeps. Then a voice, clear, calm, almost serene. Deputy Hanlon, you left the door open. He turned toward the farmhouse in the distance. The porch light was on. If you think this story was intense, wait till you hear the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it.